Okay, welcome back. This is the last part to our discussion about cytology or cell membranes and cellular transport and how it applies to you in the paramedic realm. So we're going to talk a little bit about cellular nutrition and metabolism with this section. So, our cells are chemical factories. They break down organic molecules in order to obtain energy, and this usually is in the form of ATP. But the cell has to obtain oxygen and nutrients, not only from the air we breathe, but from our diet as well. So ATP energy actually supports growth. It supports cell division, contractions, secretions, and all kinds of other special functions that vary from cell to cell and tissue to tissue. But cellular metabolism, we need to look at a couple definitions. Metabolism is referred to as all the chemical reactions that occur in the body. Cellular metabolism is specifically relating to the cell. So it maintains the energy necessary for homeostasis and the ability to perform essential functions. So we're looking specifically at the cell. We talked about catabolism in an earlier lecture, and remember catabolism or catastrophe. So we're taking something large and we're breaking it down. So we're taking large molecules, we're creating smaller ones. We look at glucose, amino acids, and fats. They're all used to produce energy. Our body will go to the glucose first. That's just its natural go-to. And then if it loses that, it's going to go to the other things. So that's why you start seeing different pathologies when you have, let's just say, your anorexic patients, for example. They don't take in enough energy stores from the use of glucose, then they're going to turn to amino acids, which are found in our proteins and fats. So that's how come you start to see them start to lose weight. They're losing muscle mass because the body is literally trying to consume itself in order to stay alive. Now, on the flip side to that, you have anabolism. It's where you're building smaller molecules and making bigger ones. So in anabolism, we used the analogy before, anabolic steroids, and those are seen in your bodybuilders because they're trying to get these really large hypertrophic type muscles. And in anabolism, you're taking those smaller molecules, or like in the picture of this, you've got all these pieces of wood, and you're going to put them together to build this house. And with anabolism, you're storing excess food. So if we take in too much, we're going to store it as fat for our future needs. And the glucose in this case is going to get stored not only in the liver, but also in the skeletal muscle, because that's where we like to use it from, right? Because if we have to run fast, we need to have that store of sugar readily available to that muscle so that it can utilize it and be able to take off and run quickly. So the glucose is stored in the liver and in the skeletal muscles. When it is stored, remember, it's stored in the form of glycogen. So why do we worry about anabolism? So your cells are going to synthesize new components for 4 primary reasons. 1, you're trying to perform structural maintenance and you're trying to repair things. You're trying to support growth for number 2. You're trying to produce secretions, or you're trying to build nutrient reserves, and that's where we talk about the glycogen. So carbohydrates are a very important source of energy, and this happens in the form of glucose. So during the glucose catabolism, during that breakdown, you will gain, a typical cell will gain 36 molecules of energy, or 36 ATP. We're going to talk about this because it relates back to how your patients tolerate or respond to certain conditions. So we talk about anaerobic metabolism. The other term for anaerobic metabolism, because just like with everything else in medicine, you've got to have 5 words to mean the same thing. Anaerobic metabolism is also referred to as glycolysis. Your sugar enters the cell. Now remember, you have that cell wall, and then you have the cytoplasm inside. So this first step actually takes place in the cytoplasm. That glucose gets broken down. It's like a 6-carbon chain. It gets broken into 2. That creates a release of 2 ATP. But you do have a byproduct. you have a byproduct of pyruvic acid. So when we think about when you're doing aerobics, you're consuming oxygen, right? But if it's anaerobic, does it need oxygen? If you answered no, you are correct. So anaerobic metabolism can occur even when there's not oxygen available. So I want you to stop and think about that. If you have a patient, I'm going to give you this example to kind of get you a concept of what we're talking about here. If you have a patient who has, maybe they're trapped from the waist down, okay, and there's no blood supply getting to from the waist down to the toes, that is a case where the cells are like, there's no incoming oxygen. What am I supposed to do? So it will use its first line of defense, which is anaerobic metabolism or the glycolysis, to get the energy it needs to try to survive while you're figuring out how to get unpinned from whatever you're pinned from. But there is a cost with that. Your cost is the pyruvic acid. Now I want you to think about acid. If we decided to drop acid on our hand, what's going to happen to the tissue? It's going to start to break down and be destroyed. So if you think about this cell is getting this acid built up on the inside. What's going to happen to the cell over time if it's not corrected? What's going to happen? That acid's going to continue to build up, and then it's going to start to break down the cell wall. So that's why we have our patients, for the example, the one that's pinned from the waist down, they can survive for a period of time if we can get quickly to them to get this reversed. But their cells are going to go to glycolysis in order to survive till you can get them free. Now, anytime you're going through this whole process, the first step is glycolysis. You gain 2 ATP as a result of that, and then that is going to move to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is considered the powerhouse of the cell. It does require oxygen. It is aerobic metabolism that is taking place, so it requires O2 for this section to work. But as a result of the Krebs cycle or TCA cycle, you'll gain another 2 ATP. All this is taking place inside the mitochondria. And then the final step is the electron transport chain, or as it exits the mitochondria, it creates this 32 ATP. So you have the 2 from the glycolysis, you have 2 from that very first step with the TCA cycle or tricyclic Krebs cycle, let's just call it Krebs cycle. The 2 from that, and then you have the 32 you gain from the electron transport chain as it's moving its way out of the mitochondria. So you have a net gain of 36 just by using sugar as a means to gain what you need. So you can see this is the whole process from beginning to end. That glucose is given permission to enter the cell. It opens that little channel, allows it to come in. It's floating around here in the cytoplasm. Glycolysis occurs. That glucose is going to break in half. You're going to create 2 pyruvic molecules, and then you're also going to release some ATP. So you got 2 from that. It goes down and it rolls up into this mitochondria, where it goes through Krebs cycle, gains another 2 ATP, and then you leave through the electron transport chain and get the final 32 ATP, the energy you need. That is the breakdown. Once more, you get a total of 36. There are alternatives to gaining ATP. In the absence of carbohydrates, where you get your sugar, you can look at alternate pathways. The first pathway is based on fats. So it's a lipid-based ATP, oh my goodness, ATP production, or it can switch to protein-based. So it looks at consuming proteins in order to get the energy it needs. Gluconeogenesis is considered the synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrates. This is where we start looking at the lactic acids and glycerols. So we're looking at different things. But excess glucose must be stored. So we know it goes into the liver and skeletal muscle. We've already kind of mentioned that. Stored as glycogen. If you depend upon the lipids, or lipolysis, if you will, where you have the lipid breakdown or catabolism, you're breaking this down, but it does produce a waste product in the form of ketone bodies. Now, if you look at this, this is the basis for the keto diet, if you're ever curious, but it's really kind of hard on your kidneys because you are creating a very acidic environment and your kidneys are being forced to cycle out the excess acidity in your bloodstream. So it's one of those little give and take deals. But you can yield 144 ATP molecules. That's almost 1.5 times the energy you gain from glucose. So that's why it's so phenomenal for weight loss in certain people. But here's the key. Your cells actually need lipids. There are parts of your body that need to have those fats or fatty acids. But your cell needs that lipid in order to maintain the cell membrane. Because remember, it has the phosphate group, but then it has the two, the diglycerides, so it has those little fatty acid tails. And your steroid hormones need fats in order to reach those target cells. Your lipids circulate in the bloodstream as lipoproteins. You cannot go without your fats. There's two major groups of lipoproteins out there. You have the LDLs and HDLs, which you probably are familiar with if you have to go to your doctor about cholesterol at all. Your LDLs are considered your bad cholesterol. So these are the ones that deliver cholesterol to peripheral tissues. They can end up as plaque in the arteries and cause us all kinds of issues as we age. Your HDLs are actually your good cholesterol. They transport excess cholesterol from the peripheral tissues to the liver for storage and actually excretion within the bile. And we also talked about that protein metabolism. So not only are we looking at lipids, but proteins. Proteins are composed of amino acids, and you get a comparable yield to what you gain with carbohydrates when you deal with the amino acid breakdown. Proteins are much more difficult to break apart. The byproducts include ammonia and ketones, and excessive protein catabolism can threaten your homeostasis. So, protein metabolism may be a way to go in the immediate fix, but it is not a long-term solution. Your amino acids go through a lot of steps to break down. There's things called transamination and then deamination, and it's a lot of extra stuff that's not really necessary for us to get through to get to the end of the road with National Registry. But what you do need to know is that the amino acids, when they get to the liver, the cells will combine carbon dioxide with ammonia and actually create urea. It's relatively harmless and water soluble, and it's excreted in the urine, but our concern is the ammonia molecules that build up. And this is where we get our ketone bodies. We have the acetone that creates that odor on the breath, and it's diffuse in general circulation, can't be metabolized by the liver, so it does have to be excreted from the kidneys. Now there's a couple of vitamins you'll want to kind of remember. Those vitamins include the water solubles, which are B, C. Your B, if you have a B deficiency, you could experience anemia, could be poor memory, headaches, nervous system damage, or C is scurvy. So when we talk about the pirates on the pirate ships, they suffered scurvy. That was because they didn't have the fresh fruits and vegetables for those long trips across the ocean. So they could encounter scurvy because they don't have the fresh fruits and vegetables to maintain their vitamin C. The way I remember this, if you can remember A, D, K, and E as your fat solubles, A, D, K, and E, fat soluble A, D, K, and E. The others are your non-fat soluble. So your A, D, K, and E are your fat soluble. The B and C are your water. A, D, K, and E are those types of, if you ever had if you're old enough like me and you had Fred Flintstone vitamins that you got given as a kid, and they tasted so good you wanted to eat the whole bottle. Mom would never let you eat the whole bottle, or if you snuck and ate them, Mom would yell at you. The reason being, the A, D, K, and E can, because they are fat soluble, will absorb into your fat stores, and as a result of that, you can build very toxic levels of these vitamins very quickly. But if you have a deficiency in vitamin A can cause blindness. D can cause a condition called rickets. I can almost promise you'll see that on National Registry. Rickets and scurvy are the two big ones with the vitamins. If they have a deficiency in K, they could have an increase in bleeding because it's necessary for clotting. And then with E, you may see problems with their reflexes. They may not have good reflexes. They may be anemic, or they may have ataxia. So ataxia has to do with your ability to balance and coordinate movement and walk. So we talk about our alcoholics. We see them staggering down the street. They would be considered ataxic because they are not able to walk with a straight line with purpose. I always think of this ataxia. If you're drunk, you have to call a taxi. So ataxia is how I remember that. And then this is pretty much the end of it for this lecture. If you have any questions, I hope you write them down or go back, look at the video again. We will cover this really closely, the specific topics in the lecture this week. So if you have any questions, make sure you write those down. Otherwise, I will see you later.